I grew up in Verona Heights, a district that glittered with manicured lawns and townhouses dressed like porcelain dolls, every shingle gleaming, every hedge trimmed within an inch of its life. Outsiders believed it was a paradise of success. They saw the expensive cars lining the curved streets, the garden parties spilling champagne into crystal flutes, and the proud families who seemed to walk with a choreography of elegance. To a child, it might have looked like magic. To me, it was a cage disguised as privilege. My parents, Leonard and Vivienne, were not merely guardians but architects of my every breath. Father was a titan in investment banking, the kind who commanded boardrooms with a single arched eyebrow. Mother chaired foundations and wore pearls the way soldiers wear medals, proof of victories in the social battlefield. Their lives revolved around optics, and as their only daughter, I was the most important prop of all. From the time I could walk, I was photographed not as a child, but as a prize. Ballet recitals where my toes bled inside satin shoes, charity events where my curls were pinned so tightly my scalp burned, all of it carefully curated to broadcast one message. We are flawless, and yet behind that perfection lived a constant, suffocating tension. Money was never just money in our house. It was a leash. Every gift carried an unspoken demand, every allowance an invisible contract. I remember the first time I tried to resist. I was 12 and had discovered an old film camera at a flea market. The vendor, a grizzled man with ink-stained fingers, showed me how the shutter clicked, how the lens caught light like a fisherman's net catching silver fish. My heart leapt. I saved pocket change for weeks until I could afford it. When I brought it home, my mother plucked it from my hands, laughed lightly, and placed it in a drawer as though it were contraband. "Darling," she said, "we don't waste time on childish fancies. You're destined for greater things." That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, already learning the terrible equation: obedience for comfort, silence for security. As I grew older, the leash only shortened. My 16th birthday gift was a silver car, a dream for any teenager, but the title was in Father's name. "So we can take it back if you slip," he said with a smile that was more warning than warmth. I understood gratitude meant compliance, and I complied most of the time until the day I met someone who would change everything: my grandfather Elias. Elias was Leonard's father, though the two could not have been more different. He had built the family fortune not by manipulating markets, but by creating a humble chain of manufacturing plants. He wore corduroy jackets, kept his house cluttered with books and chessboards, and spoke to janitors as if they were philosophers. When I visited him, I felt seen, not displayed, not evaluated, just seen. He asked me questions my parents never did: what colors I liked, what dreams I chased when no one was looking. Once, when I confessed that I loved capturing the world through lenses, he didn't laugh. He bought me my first real camera, not a toy but a sturdy Nikon that smelled faintly of oil and promise. "True wealth," he said, eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses, "is not the size of your bank account. It's the freedom to choose your own path." Those words lodged inside me like a secret flame, though I didn't yet understand how much I'd need them. Because as the years passed, the script of my life was already written without my consent. Father expected me to follow him into finance. Mother whispered of Ivy League legacies, of dinners where my name would open doors. And I, eager not to disappoint yet desperate for air, let myself be steered like a ship tied to another's rudder. University came, gilded and inevitable. My parents celebrated my acceptance into Cambridge West Business School as if it were their personal victory. At the dinner party thrown in my honor, I smiled until my cheeks ached while their friends toasted my bright future. Not one person asked what I wanted. If they had, I might have told them I longed not for boardrooms but for wide skies, not for balance sheets, but for the moment a bird launches from a branch and the camera freezes its wings like poetry. But my voice had already been trained into silence. For a while, I lived in that silence. I studied economics, recited market theories, and earned grades polished enough to satisfy even my father. Outwardly, I was a model heir. Inwardly, I felt like a counterfeit coin, shiny but hollow. Nights found me in the library basement, scrolling through photographs I had taken with Elias' camera, each image a reminder of the self I was abandoning. My secret weighed heavier than any textbook, but I clung to it, the way a prisoner hides a key beneath the mattress. Then came the summer trip that altered my life's orbit. I was 19 when I joined a study program in the northern wilderness, supposedly to learn about sustainable business models. But what I found there was a different kind of education. The air tasted raw, unfiltered by city smog, and the mountains towered with an indifference that humbled me. And there, guiding a group of students with a lens slung over his shoulder, was Adrian Cole, a wildlife photographer whose patience with nature bordered on reverence. Watching him crouch for hours to capture a fox's glance felt like witnessing someone commune with another world. When he finally turned his camera toward me and said, "You've got the eye," my heart nearly fractured with recognition. That trip lit a fire I could no longer bury. Returning to campus, I enrolled in photography classes in secret, paying for them with wages from a part-time job at the student bookstore. I told my parents I was entering business competitions that required extra hours. In truth, I was learning about composition, light, and shadow. Each assignment was a rebellion disguised as homework, each photograph a whisper of freedom. My professors noticed, praising a raw emotional depth in my images that I barely understood myself. And slowly, a thought bloomed. Maybe I wasn't broken for not loving finance. Maybe I was simply alive in a different language. But secrets, like seedlings, grow roots that eventually crack stone. Thanksgiving break became the stage for my attempted confession. Over turkey and wine, I told my parents I wanted to change my major. My mother's fork clattered onto porcelain, my father's jaw stiffened, and for 2 hours they berated, threatened, and finally offered ultimatums. "Photography is a hobby," father said, voice cold enough to freeze. "We're not funding nonsense." I apologized before dessert, swallowing my truth like poison. That night, though, I lay in bed and whispered into the dark, "Someday." It was the first time I promised myself something I didn't yet know how to keep. And then, just when I thought I would collapse under the weight of pretending, life delivered both a crushing loss and an unexpected inheritance of power. The kind of power that would turn my world upside down and force me to decide. Obedience or freedom. The first true crack in the marble statue of my family came not with an argument but with a phone call. It was a gray morning when the lawyer's voice trembled across the line, telling me that Elias, my grandfather, had passed quietly in his sleep. My heart sank as if someone had cut the strings that kept me upright. He had been the only soul in Verona Heights who asked about my heart instead of my resume, and now he was gone. The funeral was an exhibition in grandeur. The church overflowed with velvet suits and hushed murmurs, all of them rehearsing lines about legacy and inheritance. Father delivered a speech about achievement, about profits and philanthropy, as though Elias had been just another business conquest. I sat in the pew with my hands trembling, staring at the polished casket that contained the man who had once pressed a camera into my palms, and whispered that freedom mattered more than approval. Afterward, in the garden where I tried to escape the noise, our family lawyer, Mr. Strauss, approached me. His usually stiff demeanor softened. "Your grandfather spoke of you often," he said, with a pride your parents could not quite fathom. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Elias' looping script. Inside was a single line, "Remember your promise to be brave." My chest tightened. I had made that promise by his bedside, not fully understanding it then. Now, with the ink staring back at me, it felt like a command. The next morning, I was summoned to Strauss's office for the reading of the will. My parents were already there, sitting in tailored silence, their eyes gleaming with expectation. For years, they had floated on loans Elias had extended quietly, assuming it was merely an advance on father's inheritance. They imagined today would be the day their financial dominion was secured. They had no idea the world was about to flip. Strauss read in his slow, precise voice. Charities received slices of the estate. Longtime staff were granted shares of gratitude. But then came the heart of it. The remaining wealth, vast, sprawling, estimated at nearly $50 million, was placed in a trust. And I, not Leonard, not Vivienne, I alone was named trustee. My parents' faces drained of color in perfect symmetry, as if painted by the same brush of disbelief. I hardly heard the legal clauses that followed, allowances for my parents to be adjusted at my discretion, conditions that tied their lifestyle to their behavior. My ears rang with Elias' words, "True wealth is the freedom to choose your own path." For the first time, the leash had shifted hands. That evening, I received their first request, $20,000 for emotional distress. I sat in my car staring at the message, thinking of the dinner only days before when my mother had sneered, "We are not your bank anymore." My finger hovered, then pressed denied. It felt like slamming a door that had always been held open for them, a door they had used to march in and rearrange my entire life. The confrontation came swiftly. They arrived unannounced, fury etched into their faces. "How dare you?" Father hissed, his voice quivering with the shock of disobedience. "We raised you. We gave you everything." Mother's eyes burned with indignation, but behind the fire I glimpsed something new: fear. They were no longer the omnipotent monarchs of my existence. They were petitioners, forced to ask for what they had always assumed was theirs. For the first time, I did not cower. I met their anger with calm steel. 20,000 is excessive, especially from people who claimed they were not my bank. Perhaps the roles are reversed. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut skin. Days blurred into heated negotiations, threats of contesting the will, manipulations I had grown up absorbing like secondhand smoke. But Strauss had prepared me. Your grandfather anticipated this, he assured. He documented everything. Their chances are slim. And so, little by little, my parents' demands withered into resentful acceptance. With Elia's fortune came not luxury but responsibility. I worked with the trust manager to craft boundaries, a reasonable allowance for my parents, no more extravagant yachts or jet memberships, no more secret loans that bled the family dry. For myself, I took only what I needed to breathe as an artist: funds for the expedition in Tanzania, a set of cameras, and the courage Elias had insisted I carry. As I packed my bags for Africa, my parents sent one last request: 15,000 for a European holiday, to recover from grief. I denied it without hesitation, then added a note: I leave tomorrow. When I return, I hope we can begin to rebuild not as controllers and controlled, but as family. The next morning, as the plane lifted and Verona Heights disappeared beneath the clouds, I felt something I had never known before: the lightness of a soul no longer chained. For the first time, I was flying toward something of my own choosing. Tanzania was not just a country, it was an awakening. The air there hummed with life, as though every blade of grass and every ripple of heat carried a secret rhythm. I joined a team of photographers and conservationists, strangers at first, but soon companions in mud, sweat, and wonder. We tracked black rhinos under a sun so relentless it carved shadows deep into the earth. We rose before dawn to catch elephants marching in ghostly silence across the plains. And every time I lifted the camera, my heart surged as if I had been rehearsing for this moment my whole life. At first, the others looked at me with polite skepticism. To them, I was the banker's daughter dabbling in art, a tourist with expensive gear. But then my photographs began to speak for me. Where others captured technical brilliance, mine sought something more elusive: the quiet fear in a gazelle's eyes as it sensed a predator, the fierce tenderness of a mother lion shielding her cub, the dignity of a dying tree still holding out its branches to the sky. You don't just take pictures, said Eliza, our expedition leader. You capture souls. Those words stitched themselves into me, stronger than any title I had ever earned. I stopped second-guessing and began to trust my instinct: the way light fell across fur, the silent dialogue between animal and landscape. Even the hardships became a kind of proof. Trekking for hours with blisters, weathering storms that drenched every layer of clothing, eating meals of beans and dust. All of it made me feel alive in a way boardrooms never had. Midway through the journey, Adrian, the wildlife photographer I had once admired from afar, returned for a stint with our team. Seeing him again, in the place where I had finally become myself, sparked a connection that was both electric and terrifying. Around him, I didn't need the mask I wore in Verona Heights. One evening, as we watched the sun sink into a horizon set ablaze, he turned to me and said, "You look different. More alive." I surprised myself by answering, "I feel like I've been born twice, once when I entered the world and once here." The expedition ended with a celebration beneath the stars. Eliza announced that National Geographic wanted to feature my work in their next issue, a spread dedicated to the emotional lives of endangered species. The applause of my colleagues echoed, but it was the quiet inside me that mattered most: the peace of knowing I had finally chosen something entirely for myself. That night, in the flicker of lanterns, I wrote my resignation letter to the finance firm waiting for me back home. I would not return to that cage. Boston greeted me with familiar stone facades and the weight of old expectations, but I carried a new armor. My parents came to see my photographs displayed in a small gallery: images of lions, elephants, rhinos staring out at them as if demanding recognition. My mother's fingers traced the frame of a portrait silently. My father stood stiff, but his eyes betrayed something I had never seen before: uncertainty. For the first time, I realized they did not know how to measure me. I was no longer a reflection of their legacy, but a creation of my own. The months that followed were not easy. They resisted, they sulked, they tried subtle manipulations, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. I provided them a modest allowance from the trust, enough to live but not to flaunt. They moved into a smaller townhouse, less ostentatious, and though they bristled, they adapted. Without the arsenal of money as a weapon, we began, awkwardly, to see each other as people rather than roles in a performance. My father discovered he enjoyed mentoring young financiers, finding purpose in teaching rather than domination. My mother, stripped of her glittering boards, devoted herself to an arts program for underprivileged children. And slowly, the sharp edges between us dulled. 2 years later, I stood in a gallery in New York as visitors crowded around my first solo exhibition. Critics spoke of my ability to reveal dignity in fragility. Collectors bid on prints. Conservationists partnered with me for campaigns. But amid the accolades, I thought of Elias. His belief had been the seed of all this. To honor him, I established the Elias Grant for Conservation Photography, funding young artists who, like me, needed a hand to choose passion over prescription. Sometimes I still hear my parents' voices echoing in my head. Photography is a hobby. Success means stability. Family reputation comes first. But those echoes grow fainter with every dawn. I rise eager to capture the world as it is, raw and unscripted. The last photo I hung in my studio was of a lioness standing at the edge of a vast plain, her gaze fixed on a horizon that promised both danger and freedom. Every time I look at her, I see myself, the girl who once bartered obedience for comfort, now standing unshackled, choosing her own path. It took me decades to understand the lesson Elias left behind. Money can chain or liberate, but only if you decide who holds the key. Wealth without purpose is emptiness. Approval without authenticity is poison. True freedom is the courage to define your life not by what others expect, but by what sets your soul alight. And so, when people ask me what I do, I don't list titles or institutions anymore. I smile, lift my camera, and answer simply, I tell the truth that others overlook.